just rely, the consumer will unlock so many things for you if you let them. If we can put our egos aside and say, we are going to just listen. We're not going to be judgmental of our consumer. We're going to listen to their stories and their narratives, and we're not going to worry about if they're right or wrong, factually true or not. We're going to listen to them because those stories and those narratives are what drive their attitudes and their behaviors. And so the more we understand, the more empathetic, we keep using that word, but it's the number one trait that we need to have is that empathy. If we have that.
Step into the world of success with your brand amplified, the ultimate podcast designed to unravel the intricacies of thriving businesses. I'm your host, Annika Jackson, and I'm on a mission to uncover the stories, strategies, and secrets that have propelled entrepreneurs and business leaders to success. I am absolutely thrilled to have Brett Townsend on the show today. He is the co-author of Insights on the Brink, Revitalizing the Market Research and Analytics Industry. And his experience from going through his website and the press release and everything else has really shown me that you are such an expert in this. And it's something that is so important. I'm in branding, I'm in PR, I help people with strategy, but there's nothing without insights and the story. So thank you for coming here to offer some of your story and your wisdom to us.
Oh, I really appreciate you having me on. I'm looking forward to this.
I am really curious because I don't think there are a lot of people who go straight into insights and data immediately or are that interested in it in the marketing field, right? You think of that as like the computer scientist. Mm-hmm. So I'd love to hear your backstory. When did you get interested in this topic? Because your career trajectories had a lot of roles with the word insights.
Yeah, and it didn't even start where I really started, which I did not seek this out to begin with. I started my career in radio and TV broadcasting.
Oh my gosh.
And that was what my undergrad was in. And so doing that for a few years after graduation, it was enjoyable, but didn't think I wanted to do it for the rest of my life. And so I minored in marketing and through a friend who helped me get a job at Nielsen Media Research, it really started my path towards getting into marketing and consumer insights, and then led to where I am now on a career on both the agency and corporate sides.
Yeah, amazing. But I love that you had that creative background so you could understand that process and still work in the field, because marketing is very creative, but also...
It is. Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, start to learn the data side and the analytics.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I speak on a lot of college campuses, and one of the questions that I get from students a lot of times is, well, they're sometimes in the middle of a crisis about what do I do, or they're MBA students that are changing careers, and they're like, I feel like it's been such a waste of everything I've done before now that I'm trying to change. And one of the things I tell them is, it's like, you can always take something that you've learned from one part of your career and apply it to something else. And so in the case of broadcasting, I tell them where I started, and I say the two things I learned doing broadcasting that I still use to this day: I learned how to write and I learned how to tell stories. And I've done so much of that in my career that getting that background in broadcasting at a young age really has helped me throughout my entire career, even though I've moved away from broadcasting now for over 25 years.
And it just also makes you a really great interview. And because you obviously...
I hope so.
No, I already can tell, because you speak very eloquently. You don't use a lot of filler words. You take us on a little journey. I love it. So you're already using what you do for a living and what you've done in the past right now.
And I found I do the same thing with presentations. Mm-hmm. That I get up there, I get to the point. It's kind of like you hear a lot of times, don't use 10 words when 5 will do. You learn those things when you're in broadcasting, and when I'm giving a presentation, I'm broadcasting. When I am speaking with people, I'm telling a story, I'm painting a picture. And so it's all of those same skills that I learned a while ago and continue to hone and use throughout my career.
For those who listen, who are students, because I teach grad school at USC in digital media, So we talked
Awesome.
a lot about insights. For those who are maybe getting a master's or looking to switch careers, what advice would you give them? And can you tell us a little bit more about your career trajectory? So you started out at Nielsen. What were the surprise
Mhm.
moments when you got into the data side? And then how did you decide this is really where I want to go? I keep projecting that up and up and up to different major companies.
So to answer the first part of your question, what I tell students all the time, and I get asked this a lot, is what I say is be purposeful and have a plan. So in most cases, it doesn't matter what you're majoring in or what your first career was as you transition to a second career, only that you are very purposeful and have a plan on what you're going to do.
Yeah.
The worst thing is and I've talked to students who are right at the brink of graduation and they're saying, I don't know what I'm going to do now. I said, well, what did you think you were going to do when you got into this major in the first place? They're like, oh, it was interesting to me and I was given the advice to do something I enjoy. And usually what high school counselors don't follow up with is do something you enjoy that someone will pay you for. And so I think that's really kind of the thing. But there's so many things out there that you can do and be and can make a living at, just as long as you have a goal and have a purpose and have a plan. And then for me, it was, I had a plan. I purposely left broadcasting, had this role that I was able to get with Nielsen Media Research. And then once I was there, I started to discover what I really liked. There is the data and the analytics side, but I'm much more of a creative marketing minded person. And so it was how we marketed the work that we did to TV networks and things that was very interesting to me. It was the time that I spent in homes with the Nielsen households and doing qualitative interviews with them and observational research and those things that really started to generate my excitement to studying humans, basically, is what I do. And so then parlayed that into working with a publishing company, doing market research, which then led to what I call my first real role where I started to grow up in the industry. And that was with an agency called Decision Analyst in Dallas, where I really learned consumer insights and learned the ins and outs of methodology and how to work with clients and how to achieve a goal through research. And then that led to a corporate career where, working at 3 different major corporations and having a number of global and domestic roles, and really started to solidify what I love doing. And then now that I've been back on the agency side for a couple of years, that was again a purposeful choice where I just said, I'm ready to kind of step away from corporate, kind of take a little bit more control back over my life and go back to consulting, and which I really love. And I'm working at Quester, which is an agency that I was a client of for 12 years before I came over. So knew everybody there, really great friends with Tim Hoskins, who I co-authored the book with, who's the president of Quester. And it was just a very natural fit for kind of the way I think, the way I like to help clients, the way I attack problems, and the way that we do the strategic consulting.
Nice. I'm just thinking, I just had our first day of class a couple days ago, and we're talking about the ad tech world and buying ads and what are the analytics that you might use to design ads to reach the right audiences. And I just was giving them a small example of, for instance, for the agency that I work with, we work in workforce development and education. So if we have a college or a community college, we might look at the geography, get that data and research and the demographics in the region, but also know that our clients' constituents are probably a smaller subset or maybe the outlier to that. For instance, if Orange County is a very wealthy part of California, but the people who are going to go to certain colleges probably don't have that wealth. They might have English as a second language. So that might be their intention. So that we look at the demographics of the different school populations, and then we look at the psychographics so that we can figure out what is the commonality and create messaging out of that. So that's for a very, a small agency, small group, but I'd love to hear some of the ways that you've worked with your big corporations when you've been in the corporate roles, and then also as somebody on the agency side. Because I love for people to understand how the inner workings go and what questions they should ask if they're looking to hire an agency.
So yeah, that's a great setup, and I love kind of the approach that you've taken to look at psychographics and data and things. And then what I always like to say is there's two parts to building a great campaign. There's the side that you talked about, which is looking at that data and stuff, and then there is the empathy side, where you really understand the consumer and you tell a story that is impactful to them. Because story is the heart of everything.
Yeah.
And it's what is the unique brand story that only you can tell. And so having worked at PepsiCo for almost a decade, it's very interesting that Pepsi and Coke sell almost the exact same product. But yet, if you look at the stories that each of those two brands tell, they are very distinct, very different. They have staked out very clear positions for their brands, and they tell those stories over and over and over again. And I think that, and they do it in a timely way that kind of evolves with society.
Yeah.
And I think that's really the key, is that you can have all the data you want, but it doesn't mean that you're going to tell a great story.
Right.
And I think that's the point. And great stories are born from understanding what the consumer conflict is. So in your instance, you talked about a potential college student who doesn't speak English as their first language. What is a story that you can tell as a university that would attract that type of student to your school? Because you have the data that is someone that is looking for a college education, but why you? Why your school as opposed to somebody else's? And the great thing about great brand storytelling is that when you do it correctly, it's unique and it's not duplicated. There's so many levers that are easily duplicated, like price, or different things or promotions or limited time offers or things like that anybody can do that. But not everybody can tell a unique story that is so unique to who their core consumer is, that's really where brands start to separate themselves.
And that is a huge problem with a lot of brands. We see it a lot with the adult education and the workforce development agencies. They're going to talk about what they do, what their service offerings are, but they need to take, and it's not just that sector, it's many sectors.
It's all over.
But not having that story of understanding your customer, understanding their pain points, 100%. You have to get that psychological, that aspect, that empathy that you were talking about to really help them understand why you. And I think there just needs to be a lot more training on that aspect, because I think that's where a lot of people who start businesses go wrong. And my experience is mostly in the smaller business side, small to medium-sized businesses, very different from yours. But I love seeing this commonality between the sectors.
Yeah, it's interesting because my wife has her own business. She's sole proprietor of a business, and we're using a lot of the same things that I've done for big multinational corporations with her little business. Now, there's obviously differences and stuff, but it comes down to the same thing. And it comes down to understanding how a story is comprised and told. And, and this is something that we do at Quester. It's something that I've developed, is we do this type of brand training for brands who don't quite know how to tell that story. We train them how to do it and how to develop this unique brand story that only they can tell. And we've done that in my wife's business. It's like, okay, what is unique about you? What is it that you offer that nobody else in this space does? How do you separate yourself? So the principles are the same, whether you are in adult education or whether you're in a single proprietorship or whether you work for a multi-billion-dollar, global corporation. Principles are the same.
Yeah. And this really tees up the book nicely, because one of the things you're talking about is that the consumer insights profession is at a crossroads. So I'd love to hear a little bit about the book and what the aha things are that we'll learn from reading it.
So yeah, that's one of the things that we talked, that is the basis of the book, is that consumer insights in a lot of places are being marginalized. Whenever the economy starts to dip, one of the first things that gets cut is consumer insights. And we see companies that are laying off entire consumer insights departments or slashing budgets or things like that. And it's in many cases because they don't see the value. Because if they did, then they would never do that. And so the reason why we're at a crossroads as an industry is because we have historically not done a very good job of telling great stories, of really giving actionable direction to our companies. We're too caught up in delivering numbers and data and information or doing methodologies that we've lost kind of the core purpose of our existence is to make companies money.
Yeah.
And we think it's to do research in many cases, and it's not. And so we're kind of at this point where we're either at the brink of losing our influence or reasserting our value, but it's going to take an evolution of our industry in order to really maximize the value that we offer to companies.
Yeah. And I imagine part of this is also the way that AI is taking over so many things. And some people are scared of it. Some people realize that it's a tool to be used. And there are tools out there with AI that might not be able to give the more, the human side, the human perspective of data and analytics, but can show you some numbers. So I'd love to hear your perspective on that. Do you use any AI tools? Are there any that you find useful? And do you think that's part of the issue that's happening?
So short answer is yes, we do use AI tools, but it's interesting because a lot of people talk about AI as if it's coming. And guess what? It's already here.
Yeah.
And it's already become a commodity in consumer insights, believe it or not. It's funny because when I was first starting my insights career is when the internet was coming about and just starting to really gain traction. And that was the boogeyman back then. It was like, oh my gosh, it's going to totally upend our industry. And all it really did was take all of the surveys that were being done on paper and in malls and on telephone and just shift them online. But yet that everybody was kind of afraid of the implications of the internet. It's the same kind of thing with AI. Is that a lot of people are afraid of what the implications of AI are to the consumer insights industry. And what I would say is, if you think your job is only analyzing numbers and doing methodologies, then you should be afraid of AI because AI can easily do those things. But there is no empathy in data and there is no empathy in AI. There's no emotion in AI. And so if you view your job as being storytellers, as being consumer-centric gatekeepers, as having empathy for the consumer and developing stories, then AI can help you with all the mundane stuff. And it can really help you focus on what's most important. And especially when it comes to innovation, AI is awful at innovation because all AI does is just gather what already exists and spit it back out to you. And that's not a way to innovate. But so many people are doing that, which is why you see so many of the same types of innovations come out and they all fail. And it's hard to grasp why people think that that's a good solution. But really, and it's become a commodity in the sense that so many conferences that I've been going to over the last year or two, everybody is touting their new AI tool, their new AI data collection tool. Everybody's got one. So that's not a differentiator. It's how do you analyze? How do you tell the stories? We have, not only do we have data collection AI capabilities, but we have data analyzing AI capabilities. But then even after all of that, we have linguists, we have humans that are developing the stories. Like we, at the end of the day, are saying, these are the narratives. These are the stories. This is how you build your brand. And it's all human emotion, empathy driven. And if that's what you view your job as, AI is going to be your best friend, not your worst enemy.
Fantastic. What are some of the ways that consumer insights can be best utilized? So you take the data, you create the stories, right? But then the next steps to maximize revenue, to grow, to whatever the objectives are for the brand. Because I think that's another place where people, sometimes it gets lost in translation.
For sure. And I think you said it, is like what objectives? And so many times, again, like I mentioned earlier, sometimes we view our job as doing research. Right. Or we're just taking orders from our coworkers to go do certain types of research without any business acumen or understanding what the problems we're trying to solve or anything like that. And so insights really is the foundation for everything. We talk about at the early part of the book about how consumer insight should have no natural predators within a company, because everybody should love working with us because we help them do their jobs better, which then make the company money. We help marketing tell better stories. We help sales sell in products. We help product development develop more impactful solutions for consumers. So everybody should love us. But when we're not doing our job effectively, then we are the greatest threat to our own existence. And we can cause our own extinction in some cases. And so really insights is used for everything. And that's kind of what we suggest towards the end of the book when we talk actually to senior executives, is that the company culture should be one of everyone's in charge of the consumer, not just consumer insights. It should be a corporate-wide obsession, almost, so to speak, to have everybody should have the consumer at the heart of everything they do, not just consumer insights. And when everybody takes on that responsibility, then you really start to see that magic. And everybody's like, what does the consumer think? It's not just what my gut is, or I'm going to take one data point and run with it, or who's the loudest voice or the most senior person in the room who's, thinking what should be done. It's what does the consumer need? And that's what we build around.
That's something we see some brands do a really good job of, and other brands fall flat. We've seen a number of brands who have put out an ad that might be racist, even though they don't realize it, right? Or are
don't get me started.
To what's going on. So it seems like the people at the top of the food chain who are making decisions are not putting themselves in the shoes of the consumers. They're so far removed probably from the world of their consumers. So how do you create a great team? Like, what would the ideal makeup of a team be for you? Whether it's, the diversity of skin tone, the diversity of age, of experience. Like, what are some of the key factors that you've seen make a successful team?
Yeah, I've been on all types, and I would absolutely say that, diversity is great on an insights team. I always would tell myself that if I'm sitting in an interview and I'm interviewing someone who I think, ooh, this person is just like me, like, sorry, you're not getting hired because we already have me on the team. And so I don't think it's about focusing on skin color or background or age or anything like that. That will come. We have a whole chapter in the book about how to build teams. And I think what we focus on is diversity of experience. We don't need our market research teams or consumer insights teams don't need to be built with a bunch of methodologists or even we argue a bunch of people who have only had a career in consumer insights, because you kind of become very narrow-minded in the way that you're looking at things. Where I've had great success is bringing in people from other parts of the company. So we're getting diverse business acumen on the team. So I brought in people from supply chain, from product development, from sales, because they have been the end user of consumer insights. They are our constituents. They know what needs to be done to sell or to create. And so if I have that perspective on my team, they say, you know what, this is what was done before and it didn't quite give us what we needed. Here's really what we need. Oh my gosh, that's a great revelation to me. Or having them work with retailers or work with the product development people because they speak their language and they know what's going on. So for me, it's diversity of experience that we need. And in addition to that, we need people because, again, we should be the hub of the company. We work cross-functionally with more departments than any other group within a company. And so we need people who are great relationship builders, people who are persuasive, people who are charismatic. It doesn't mean you got to be an extrovert, but it just means people listen to you when you talk. We need people who listen really well. I mean, Simon Sinek says that these are no longer soft skills, as we've talked about. They're human skills that we all need. So that's really where I choose to focus. And then what has happened to me is looking for diversity of experience. I get diversity of background, of skin color, of things like that just becomes inherent with that. And so that's that. And maybe I've been lucky But I think that's just it depends on how you want to focus it. But for me, it's worked out where I get all different kinds of diversity by focusing on diversity of experience.
Yeah. I really appreciate that mindset and the way that you framed it, because it also makes sure that everybody, no matter what team they're on, what department they're in, feels really invested. They helped build this and they are really part of the company.
And what it does for those who have come in for those areas is then, in most cases, they've gone back to sales or back to product development, but now they have a consumer understanding that they did not have before. It helps their careers. It helps them go up the chain much quicker than if they had just stayed there. So it is a really great pit stop, if you want to call that, or a great rotation within a company for people to come into consumer insights and really gain that consumer centricity or that customer obsession that they take with them to where they go next. And they're even better at their jobs because of it.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I want to ask, because you have so much experience, you've written a book on consumer insights and the industry. You've been at major organizations that, to your point, earn billions of dollars a year. Have you had any stumbles in your insights career, or any times when you're fighting for something and the organization took it a different way and you saw the results were exactly what you thought they were, right? But not what the company necessarily thought they'd be?
Of course. I mean, that happens all the time, and I don't want to throw anybody or any company under the bus or anything like that. I think what I will say is that that is going to happen. I mean, companies don't always listen to consumer insights. Senior executives don't always listen to our recommendations. And that's fine. That's on them, and so many of my colleagues have been at places, a coworker of mine from PepsiCo was at Blockbuster and made a presentation to the senior board about they should acquire Netflix. And they're like, no, they're no threat to us. Yep, that's what happened, you know? And so what I would say is that what can happen is, and we see this a lot, is that insights people get dejected or depressed, or then they start to kind of go into a mode of self-preservation where they stop pushing back. They stop saying no to bad ideas, or they stop making recommendations because they don't feel like they're being listened to. And they're just like, you know what, I'm going to put my head down and do my job, collect my paycheck, and, I'll just be a yes man, basically. And I would submit that is very damaging to our industry, and it's damaging to the companies you work for. There's certainly a way that you can be respectful and that you can say no, but. And that was what I always try to do, is just say, I don't think this is a good idea, but here's how we can reframe it, or here's how we can change it, or what if we were to do this instead? So it's being open-minded and opinionated at the same time. But there's always a respectful way to go about that. And I think that's the balance that we have to have, is we have to refuse to do bad research. We have to refuse to say, we're not going to go validate something for the 10th time, because we know that already. We're supposed to be smarter now and just offer better solutions, but always keep pushing forward, no matter what setbacks you have.
And for the entrepreneur who's just starting their business, or the small business who hasn't necessarily gone down this road, what are some key recommendations you would make, whether they're hiring an agency, deciding to hire in-house, or just figure out they have a low budget, they need to figure out some tools to use? What are some steps they should take to start their journey?
So I always say, before you even think about hiring someone else or whatever else, I think the first thing is kind of, we keep hitting on this theme, you and I, but it's so true. It's, why are you unique? What is it you're offering that nobody else does? Because everybody who starts a business thinks that they have something that can make them successful. Well, what is that? Why do you think that you're going to stand out in a crowd of whatever this is? So what is your unique story? And a lot of people just start a business because they're smart, or they have a really cool invention. Like, I've gone to CES and see some of those amazing technological things, and I look and go, who's going to buy this? Nobody's going to buy it. So there's not a lot of insight there into understanding what the consumer wants. It's just, I'm really smart and I developed this and I'm going to put it out there. So I think it's really understanding. It's like, you are there to serve a customer, whoever that is, whether it's a B2B or a B2C or direct to consumer, whatever it is, you're serving a customer. So what is that unique story that only you can tell about what you can offer? And it doesn't take a lot of money, a huge budget to know what that story is. It also doesn't take a lot of money to then go to people who are loyal to you and your business and your brand. Even if you're a small business and you've got 5 really loyal customers, talk to them. Why is it that you love us so much? What do we do that's different than what other people that you've tried within this space do? And then use that as the basis for your storytelling. Help them, use them to help you create that. And then I think it's having a purpose. Mm-hmm. There's so many companies that have performance, but the special companies are the ones that have performance with purpose. Mm-hmm. And so what is your purpose? Why do you exist? And it's not to sell a product. You're there for something, whatever that is. And I think the clearer that you articulate that from the very beginning, the better chance of success that you have. Now, it's not going to mean that you can skip other steps or that it's going to be easy or anything like that, but have that consistent brand story that you tell that always talks about your purpose, and it's the why. Simon Sinek's golden circle. Don't waste time talking about what you do or how you do it. Talk about why consumers need what you're offering. And if you have that as your foundation, it doesn't matter if you are a small business, a struggling business, whatever else, you're going to see a difference.
Yeah, it's funny because I've had a lot of clients come in who say, I want PR. They have a website, they have a logo, but they don't have the story. So I always take them back. Let's do a brand blueprint. What is your purpose? What is your vision, your mission, your values? Then we can craft a positioning statement and some key phrases that we associate with you to show the why.
And to answer the other part of your question, if you are starting to look for an agency, the first thing that I always would do when I was on the corporate side and I was looking for an agency is I wanted an agency that would push back, that would ask me questions and challenge some of the things that I did, because I don't know everything. And if you're looking for an agency and all they do is take whatever you tell them and go do it, I would never do that. I would never work with an agency that just did whatever I told them to do, because you look for an agency that has expertise, obviously, in what you need, but is willing to have that discussion with you, to offer alternatives, to offer different strategies, to help you see something in a way that you haven't seen, because your agencies aren't just there to do work for you. They're there to push you to be better.
Yeah.
And so find an agency that is going to push you to be better.
Nice. Well, this is only a little tease. I know that I could ask you questions for the next few hours.
I'm sure we could have a fun discussion. All the way into the evening for sure.
But I just would love to hear, I think you just gave us the one last piece of advice, thinking about the storytelling, the why, your purpose, and making sure that is infused in everything you do, every blog post you write, every social media post, when you're talking to a prospect. But I'd like to see if there's anything else that you want to share that we maybe haven't covered, or any one last nugget of advice.
Just the consumer will unlock so many things for you if you let them. If we can put our egos aside and say, we are going to just listen. We're not going to be judgmental of our consumer. We're going to listen to their stories and their narratives, and we're not going to worry about if they're right or wrong, factually true or not. We're going to listen to them because those stories and those narratives are what drive their attitudes and their behaviors. And so the more we understand, the more empathetic, we keep using that word, but it's the number one trait that we need to have, is that empathy. If we have that, then it's all going to work. And to just not be so arrogant as to think we know everything. There are CEOs that are fantastically smart and know business back and forwards and know how to manage a company and run financials and do all sorts of things. But many times they are, as you said earlier, so far removed from the consumer, and they let their egos get in the way of really amazing success that they could be having. And so just being willing to say, I probably don't know everything. Let's talk to those who we serve. And to remember, one of my favorite quotes is from the book Zag by Marty Neumeier, where he says, your brand is not what you say it is, it's what they say it is. And so understand that, yes, you may own the Pepsi brand, using that as an example, but it's really the Pepsi lover who are the guardians of that brand, who really own that brand and say what that brand is. So trust them and use them, listen to them.
Oh, that's fantastic. Brett Townsend, thank you so much for spending some time with me today. I will link to your book, your website in the show notes, that everybody knows how to reach out, learn more about everything that you're doing right now.
Thanks, Annika. We'd love to have conversations like this. And so if you want to just have a conversation, I'm all ears. So look forward to talking with you more and hearing from you later.
Fantastic. Yeah, we will definitely be in touch. And thank you to everybody who's also watching or listening to this episode of Your Brand Amplified. I'll be back again with another amazing guest this week. Thanks for listening or watching to this episode of Your Brand Amplified. Don't forget to leave us a rating or review on your favorite podcast listening platform. And if you want to learn more, check us out at yourbrandamplified.com.